Welcome back to Behind Closed Files, where we delve into the most chilling and baffling cases. Lee Ki-young, a serial killer's descent into darkness. The story of Lee Ki-young begins like many other criminals, hidden behind the mask of an ordinary life. Born in South Korea, Lee Ki-young's background revealed little about the darkness that would later emerge. His life was unremarkable to those who knew him. But beneath the surface, Lee harbored the capacity for violence, manipulation, and cruelty, which would erupt in a series of brutal murders that shocked the nation. In the summer of 2022, Lee's secret life began to unravel. Living in Paju, a suburban city in Gyeonggi Province, he was involved in a relationship with a woman in her 50s. To the outside world, their relationship appeared normal, but behind closed doors it had taken a much darker turn. Over time, Lee became increasingly abusive and manipulative, driven by a thirst for control and financial gain. The turning point came in August 2022, when Lee committed his first murder. In a shocking act of brutality, he killed his live-in girlfriend in cold blood by bludgeoning her with a blunt object. The exact reasons behind the murder remain somewhat ambiguous, but it was clear that Lee was motivated by both personal and financial interests. After killing her, he disposed of her body by the nearby Gangneungcheon River, hoping to erase all traces of his crime. Despite extensive searches, her body was never recovered, leaving investigators with little physical evidence to piece together the full extent of Lee's actions. For several months, Lee carried on with his life, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. His ability to hide such a heinous act from the world speaks to his disturbing mental state. While authorities did not initially diagnose him as a psychopath, later psychological assessments would paint him as an antisocial psychopath with a high risk of recidivism. Lee's crime had not only destroyed one life, but set the stage for further atrocities. In this phase, we see the making of a criminal mind, someone capable of extreme violence, but skilled enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy. His actions remained concealed until December 2022, when a fatal accident would bring his violent tendencies back into the spotlight. Lee Ki-young's criminal spree escalated dramatically in December 2022, leading to his second murder. It all began with what seemed like an unfortunate accident, but soon revealed the extent of Lee's capacity for calculated violence. On the night of December 20th, 2022, Lee was driving under the influence of alcohol when his car collided with a taxi in Paju, Gyeonggi Province. The incident was minor, but for Lee, it became a deadly opportunity. Under normal circumstances, such a crash would have resulted in an exchange of information and insurance details. However, Lee, sensing a way to exploit the situation, lured the 60-year-old taxi driver back to his residence, claiming he would settle the damages privately. Once the driver arrived at Lee's home, he quickly realized this was no ordinary negotiation. The taxi driver was greeted not with an offer of compensation, but with a violent ambush. Lee bludgeoned the man to death using a blunt object, mirroring the brutality of his earlier crime. In an attempt to conceal the evidence, he hid the body inside a closet in his home, a gruesome act that would go undiscovered for days. What makes this crime even more disturbing is Lee's cold and calculated approach afterward. Following the murder, he immediately began using the victim's credit cards, making purchases worth millions of Korean won. Investigators later found that Lee was financially motivated in both this and his earlier crimes, using violence as a tool for personal gain. The rapid shift from a car accident to a calculated murder revealed his readiness to exploit any situation for his benefit. For several days, Lee managed to hide the murder from the authorities and the outside world. His ability to function normally, despite committing two brutal killings, suggested a chilling lack of remorse or empathy. In fact, it wasn't until his new girlfriend discovered the body in his home that the truth began to unravel. Shocked and horrified, she alerted the police, leading to Lee's arrest. During his interrogation, Lee's calm demeanor and lack of guilt became apparent. He not only admitted to the murder of the taxi driver, but also confessed to the earlier killing of his ex-girlfriend, details of which the police had no prior knowledge. His confession marked him as a serial killer, willing to kill at a moment's notice when the opportunity arose. This section of the story highlights Lee Ki-young's transition from a hidden murderer to a serial killer whose crimes were no longer confined to the shadows. His manipulation of the situation following the accident and his cold-blooded approach to both killings showcases the terrifying nature of his personality. As the investigation into Lee Ki-young's horrific crimes began to unfold, authorities were faced with a series of shocking revelations that only deepened the horror surrounding his actions. The discovery of the taxi driver's body in Lee's home was just the beginning. Lee's calm confession to this murder and his subsequent admission to killing his ex-girlfriend months earlier immediately cast him as a dangerous and remorseless serial killer. When the police arrived at Lee's home in December 2022 following the call from his current girlfriend, they were not initially prepared for what they would find. As they began to search the house, they discovered the taxi driver's body stuffed into a closet, gruesomely hidden in the hopes of delaying the investigation. Lee had gone to great lengths to conceal the crime, but the discovery forced him into a corner. Under questioning, Lee calmly admitted to the murder, describing in disturbing detail how he lured the victim to his home under the guise of resolving the car accident, only to bludgeon him to death shortly after. As the investigation deepened, Lee shocked authorities further by confessing to an earlier murder, his live-in girlfriend, whom he had killed months prior in August 2022. His chilling admission revealed that he had killed her during an argument, using a blunt object to deliver a fatal blow, much like in the taxi driver's murder. Following her death, he concealed her body near the Gangneungcheon River in Paju, an area that he believed would prevent her remains from being found. Despite intensive searches by law enforcement, her body has never been recovered. Throughout the investigation, it became clear that Lee's primary motive in both murders was financial gain. He admitted to using the victims' credit cards in the aftermath of their deaths, making significant purchases and spending large sums of money. In the case of his ex-girlfriend, he had been living off her finances, further explaining his need to dispose of her when the relationship turned sour. Lee's manipulation extended beyond the murders. During the investigation, authorities uncovered that he had forged documents and committed fraud, using his victims' identities to access financial resources. His extensive web of lies and deceit painted a picture of a man driven not just by violence, but also by greed and a desire to exploit those around him for personal gain. What baffled investigators most was Lee's demeanor throughout the investigation. Unlike many criminals who exhibit signs of panic or remorse after being caught, Lee remained calm, almost indifferent. Psychological evaluations revealed him to be an antisocial psychopath, characterized by a lack of empathy, an inflated sense of self-worth, and a high risk of committing further violent crimes. Prosecutors argued that his cold and calculating nature, combined with the severity of his crimes, made him one of the most dangerous individuals in recent memory. The investigation into Lee Ki-young's crimes not only exposed the details of his brutal murders, but also uncovered a much broader pattern of deception, manipulation, and greed. As investigators pieced together the full extent of his actions, it became clear that Lee was not just a murderer, but a man who viewed others as mere tools for his personal gain, ready to be discarded the moment they were no longer useful. The trial of Lee Ki-young, which commenced in early 2023, was one of the most highly publicized legal proceedings in South Korea. His calm demeanor and remorseless attitude throughout the investigation had already cemented his reputation as a cold-blooded killer. Now, in the courtroom, the full extent of his actions would be laid bare for the world to witness. Prosecutors sought the harshest possible sentence for Lee, pointing to the sheer brutality of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse. They charged him with 2 counts of murder, both premeditated and executed with clear intent. In addition to the homicides, Lee faced charges of fraud, document forgery, illegal use of credit cards, and violations of information communication and credit card laws. His web of deception extended far beyond the killings, painting a picture of a man who viewed others only as means to an end. The courtroom was packed with media, family members of the victims, and the public, all eager to see justice served. In his defense, Lee's legal team attempted to argue for leniency, suggesting that his difficult past and psychological state may have contributed to his actions. However, psychological evaluations revealed that Lee was an antisocial psychopath with a high risk of reoffending. His profile showed a clear lack of empathy and a propensity for extreme violence, making it unlikely that rehabilitation would be possible. During the trial, Lee's lack of emotion was once again evident. He showed little regret for the lives he had taken, admitting freely to the murders as if recounting ordinary events. His confession only added to the sense of dread that surrounded him. The victims' families, devastated by their losses, pleaded for the harshest sentence, expressing their grief and anger at Lee's callous disregard for human life. Ultimately, the court ruled that Lee's actions were so heinous that they warranted a life sentence. Despite some calls for the death penalty, the court opted for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing his confessions and partial restitution to the victims' families. In delivering the sentence, the judge emphasized that Lee posed an ongoing threat to society and that his crimes had caused irreparable harm to the victims and their families. The Korea Herald. The aftermath of Lee Ki-young's crimes left a lasting mark on South Korean society. His case raised significant questions about how violent criminals are identified and treated, particularly those with antisocial personalities. His ability to commit such brutal acts, remain undetected for months, and live a seemingly normal life shocked the public. It also highlighted the need for stronger mental health assessments for individuals who show signs of violent tendencies. The legacy of Lee Ki-young's murders will forever be associated with betrayal, brutality, and a chilling lack of empathy. His story serves as a grim reminder of the dangers posed by individuals who can blend into society while harboring dark, violent tendencies. His life sentence brought some measure of justice to the victims' families, but the emotional scars left behind by his actions will take far longer to heal.